Hi everyone, Joy here. I'm going to share with you how to put together the Make and Take card number 7 from Stamp Joy 2020. Now here is the card that we will be making, and in your little bag that you received for the Make and Take number 7, you will have a sugar cube card base, which is A2 sized, and also a piece of watercolor cardstock, 118 pound, that is also A2 sized. There's a rough side and a smooth side, and we will be using the smooth side for this project. The other products we will be using is the Full of Flowers stamp set, a sentiment, the Hello sentiment that we get from the kit, the pineapple and blue raspberry liquid watercolors, Oreo ink and Versamark embossing ink, a powder tool and white embossing powder, and some drip drop pieces. Now we're going to start with the piece of watercolor cardstock into the MISTI. We're going to stamp down the Full of Flowers stamp. First we will prep the background with the powder tool. Then we're going to use some Versamark ink to ink up the whole stamp and stamp that down because we were going to be doing some white embossing with the white embossing powder. So again, inking up that Versamark ink, putting down a lot of pressure. I'm inking it one more time to get a really good solid impression. Once that's done, then we're going to add some embossing powder. This is white embossing powder. I'm going to sprinkle that on, making sure I have full coverage before I use my heat tool to heat that all the way through. I'm going to heat that until it is melted, and you know that it'll be melted when everything is shiny when you look at it in the light. If you have any dull spots or any spots that look grainy, you need to reheat that and melt that completely again until it's nice and shiny. So as you can see there, it's very shiny. Now I'm using a hardboard and I'm going to tape down that piece of cardstock. I am just using some purple tape. You can use painter tape as well. This will help with warping. I'm taping off about 1/8 of an inch on all sides. If you don't have a hardboard or tape, it's totally fine to not tape it down. But this again will keep it from warping. Now I've got my 2 little dishes that I'm going to be putting the liquid watercolors in. I'm going to do 4 drops each. That's the blue raspberry. I'm going to shake it very well and then add the pineapple to that dish, 4 drops of each. Then I've got my paintbrush and some clean water, and I'm going to get this watercolor cardstock nice and wet. You want it glistening but not dripping. So I'm adding a lot of water to this, and I'll show you in just a second how shiny that is. Then I'm going to dip my paintbrush into the first color and just add some. I feel like I needed a little bit more water on my card base. So I'm going to add a little bit more because that watercolor wasn't moving enough. So now I'm going to come in with the blue raspberry and I'm going to touch it next to that pineapple. You want to get a good mix of colors. You want yellow, you want blue, and then you want the green that those 2 colors are going to make. So right there you can see I'm coming in and having a little bit of green. Cleaning off my brush before I dip it into the next color. And as you're going along, if you feel like your paper is getting a little bit too dry, you should add some more water to your cardstock. You want your watercolors to move around. So again, you can see right there, I'm making some really nice green color, a good mixture. Adding a little bit more water, making sure that my cardstock is not dry, but making sure it's not too wet. And I needed a couple more drops of that pineapple. And it got really dark right here, which I really did like. There was some variances between the yellows. Coming back in with that blue raspberry, mixing it into the yellow. Again, we're getting some green. And then you've got the darker blue, the darker yellow, and then the nice greens mixing together. I'm going to finish up this last little corner with the yellow, and then I'm mixing it into the blue because I definitely wanted a good amount of green. Cleaning my brush in between each color, making sure I have good clean water. I felt like I needed a little bit more green on that side, and then I'm going to come in with a little bit more blue and then just finish that off. Now I'm going to take a paper towel and gently glide it across the tape, not on my paper, just to get the water off. If you touch it to your paper, it will pull some of your watercolor off of your cardstock. just cleaning up the edges around with a dry paper towel. Now I'm going to take my heat tool and heat this up and get it nice and dry. You don't want to get this too hot. Don't get your gun too close because you don't want to remelt your embossing powder. It will just absorb into the paper. Once that's completely dry, we're going to slowly peel back the tape. I'm going to take it at a 45-degree angle and lightly and gently pulling that back as to not rip the cardstock. Once all of that tape is pulled off, if you have any wet spots, just take a dry paper towel and gently dab your cardstock to remove any wet watercolor pieces on your cardstock. Now I'm going to trim this piece down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm taking a little bit off of all 4 sides so it's nice and even, and cutting off where we had taped off the sides. Now I'm also going to cut the top piece to 3 1/4 inches, and we're going to adhere that to the top of the sugar cube card base with some foam adhesive. You can do foam squares. I am using the foam sticky circles behind my card base. Once we adhere that down, you want to make sure that you have an even spacing on the top and the sides of white, like a white mat. Make sure the top and the sides have all the same amount of white around. Now we're going to place this card panel into the MISTI so we can stamp our sentiment. We're using the Hello sentiment from the stamp sets that you received in your kit. I'm going to line that up, looking at the grid on my MISTI, making sure that everything is nice and level, and double checking it by stamping it onto the grid paper in the back of my MISTI. If it's a little bit off, I'm going to just straighten that up, stamp it one more time, and check before I put my card base back in. Now that that's done, we're going to put the card base in, stamp it with the Oreo ink. I'm stamping it twice to get a nice, good, solid image. Now we have this bottom portion that we cut off. I'm going to flip that over, line everything up how far down I want it, and just take a pen or a pencil and make a little mark and put that in my trimmer and trim that piece off. We will also add some foam tape behind that and adhere that to the bottom of that card base. Getting that nice and level, making sure it's level with the top piece, and the sides and the bottoms all have the same amount of white space around it. Coming in with some drip drop pieces, there's 3 different sizes, so I'm starting with the large, then the medium, then the small. I'm using a little bit of liquid glue, adding a tiny dot down, and adding the drip drop pieces. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you enjoyed this Make and Take card number 7.